Okay. Welcome. If you guys could switch on the monitors, then you have a bit more of a reflection as well there. So, yes. So, first of all, apology for last week. I recorded all the lectures and they're also on YouTube, but they were listed at, no, they were not listed, they were unlisted. In fact, because yeah, we're sharing the streaming account and someone set it to unlisted and I didn't recheck that. So, but they are in the playlist and they are now also public in addition to that one. So, and that's the convention by which I do it generally. I shifted into the more programming playlist and you would find them there related to those sessions here. So last week you can recollect it from there. Yeah, so much about that. So last week we talked about storage once and services as the last session. By the way, let's see if the stream is actually working because I'm using Wi-Fi and that's usually a bit of a risk. But luckily there are not too many people here, so it makes it a bit more sensible. Cool. Today notifications, one of the topics in mobile development. Who used them already in their privately pet project assignments? Toasts, okay. Yeah, that's the lightest form. They're convenient, right? So toasts are quite good for debugging, visual debugging if you like, because you can quickly output stuff and pretty much from any application component, right? So you're not constrained, whereas in most other cases you're kind of tied down to your often activities, right? But toast is one of the ways. But when I mean notifications, I mean those tiny things that are semi-persistent and sit on top of the status bar, right? So and Android has them, so I don't know, so we probably cover them to some extent. It's not a particularly deep topic, admittedly, but it's probably still worthwhile thinking about and see what's out there, what you can explore if you want to go down that route a bit. Of course, I'll show you some basic notifications, but it quickly gets quite sophisticated because, you know, UI software interaction is then quite involved and gets into the nitty-gritties of Android there. So what do we have? So in terms of notifications, what they are, the types that we have in Android, and you know, to some extent how to create them, I guess that's most sensible. You guys are all aware of them, basically, right? So you get annoyed by them every time you get a text message or SMS, or you have a missed call, for example, or your favorite media player has something persistently sitting up there. You name it, right? So, and if you don't take care of it, suddenly you don't see your status bar anymore because it's full of notifications. I don't know. Or WhatsApp, of course, one of those classical messengers that pollute us there. So, notifications have been around in Android for quite a while, right? So that's how they roughly look like. You have some sort of message in the status line. It's, you know, some sort of event-related notification, of course. And you have kind of a panel that you can pull down so you can, to some extent, interact with them, right? So you at least swipe them away, sometimes even reply to them in the more advanced ones since Android 7. Yeah, there's a lot of magic you can do there. You can, for example, introduce buttons, you can have pictures, you have expanded notifications, and so on. You can group them and so on. We will look into that in a bit. But you know the intuitions. But before I go into what we look at for now, I just want to go into to some extent to the past and just basically think about what individual features have been added, because notifications is probably one of the most dynamic or one of the more dynamic features of Android in a way. So initially in Android 4, it's probably the biggest jump moving away from just having the notification with a simple message. There were suddenly expanded notification templates where, you know, the notifications expand beyond those 64 dp right now, so the fixed height for normal notifications, but you can expand them further since then. There's notification listeners in the API were added in 4.4. It's quite interesting as well. So you can basically listen to other notifications that are sent by other applications, which is kind of a bit creepy, right? So because it allows you to potentially intercept notifications by other applications. I think the access to this has been limited in recent versions again. But so that was quite early already, right? So in API 19. In Android 5, the lock screen notifications were introduced, so that's quite neat. So You guys know those as well, right? So you can see your text messages and so on the lock screen already, unless you suppress it, you hide them explicitly. And apart from the visibility, which you can control with set visibility on a notification, we'll see that in a second. You could also set the priority. So at that stage, notifications were no longer treated as equals, right? So basically, you can have some more annoying notifications that point you to some more urgent means or aspects you need to attend to, whereas other ones, which are I don't know, text messages probably are not as critical, but if you have critical message related to security, for example, or power and so on, then it probably makes sense to provide a bit more insistent interaction with the user, because you can quickly get saturated by all those notifications. So Google thought about having an opportunity for notifications to stand out when needed. The other aspect they also introduced, and that's something we'll probably have a look at briefly later on as well, is you could group notifications. You can stack them basically, right? So if you have a notification that follows a previous notification, for example, text messages and so on, you notice that they're not necessarily shown as individual notifications anymore, but they actually group together, right? So you see them as one group of notifications, and that is separated, let's say, from weather notifications and from media player notifications and so on, right? So otherwise, it would be hardly manageable. WhatsApp is a good example for that one, right? So it usually stacks notifications. It tells you have so many messages from so many threads and so on. And then 7 onwards, there was a restyling. There was the inline reply functionality was added, so you could actually reply within notifications already. So that's quite a neat feature, right? So to be a bit faster there, basically. And on Android 8, the most significant change was that you now can, for you as a developer in particular, that you now can organize notifications by channels. So, and the idea is there basically, think about it more like an organizational tool. If you associate a given notification with a particular notification channel, you could elevate or demote the priority of that very channel. So for all notifications associated with this. Makes it quite convenient from a developer point of view, right? So if you want to manage all that coherently. So that's kind of a new feature. And of course, then the channel-specific notification or notification characteristics are managed by the system. So should a phone vibrate? Should you see, should it use lighting to make itself known, or audio and so on, right? So you can manage this now in the settings, in the Android settings, as opposed to on application level if you rely on channels. And then there's a lot of stuff that has been moved from the actual notifications towards notification channels, of course, because now priority is no longer per notification, but per channel. Anyway, I just want to give you a brief rundown of the most important shifts over time. They probably come together once we talk a bit more about notifications, makes a bit more sense. But there was quite a bit of dynamic over the past few years. So if you're looking back, specifically if you want to implement it, be mindful of the time frame, right? So don't necessarily be cautious when using or looking at older code, because it may simply not be working in the first place or have a lot of deprecated functionality, especially related to the setting of priority in notifications, because that has been moved to channels. Okay. So. Right, that's how they look like. Here's directly taken from the Android developer page. In fact, everything I'm talking about is largely reflected, some aspects to more, some to less extent, on the Android developer pages. So it's really worthwhile having a look at those ones. Basically scroll through. In fact, we'll see that in a second to really understand what notifications are about and to see the core features. So so what's the anatomy? Basically, you have a notification there. And on the top left, you have some sort of small icon. That's the only one that's technically required. So a lot of those components are optional, but the small icon is required. You have an application name, of course, that is then provided by the system. You configure it basically as a developer, of course. And then you have the timestamp, which you can suppress. So that's the kind of indication how old your notification is, right? Like 10 seconds ago, 15 minutes ago, or something like this, you received that notification. So as a developer, you can suppress whether it's actually shown or not. For example, if you have a media player notification, basically like a status, like a interaction mechanisms, probably doesn't really make sense to display time there, right? So at least the time frame since the notification has been shown. And then you can optionally have larger items as shown here on the right. So for example, like people, avatars, some sort of icons and things like that. And of course, you can set some content. So you have a title and the actual message that you can configure, both of which are optional, in fact, right? So there's actually very few things that you need to mandatorily specify, but of course, it makes little sense having notification without, meaningful content in that sense. I will not go deeply into icons. I'll just point you to some developer guidelines for icons, the do's and not do's, because before we go there, because I don't want to go back from there afterwards. So the idea is that status bar icons should be in principle transparent. If you have a shape, they should be transparent so they can easily adapt to the underlying GUI, right, irrespective of the vendor and so on. There are some specifications in terms of the pixel that icons should have with respect to the density of the screen they're displayed on, right, if you want to develop that. What else? So yeah, it's basically quite straightforward, following the idea. A few guidelines in terms of how you deal with contrast to ensure contrast and what you should avoid. So instead of using colorful icons for those ones, you should use gray shaded ones or transparent ones in order to let the operating system control kind of the aesthetics of this icon. So that doesn't expand to pictures or the like. It's just the mini icon on the top left that basically is associated with the notification. But since there's so much discussion about this, how to do it properly, I just point you to the resources. And it's basically here under Guides, Practices, UI Guidelines, Icon Design for the status bar. And it just tells you what you do and what you shouldn't need to do. For example, don't stretch icons. They need to correspond to the resolution specified. Don't use colors. Be transparent when you have this kind of setup, just to have everything appear a bit more coherently. Anyway, back to the more important bits, since I'm not a designer anyway. So, right. So, just before we hang on, should I? Probably can give you an appreciation. So we have different notifications. When I'm talking about notification channels, just to say that in advance, I'm in Android 8 in particular onwards, they control kind of the notification behavior in particular. And you find this, or you can manage this under Settings, App Notifications, and then you see channels. I probably can just show that in an emulator. That's more relevant from the user side, of course, but I think it's still sensible to just touch up on that briefly. Hang on. It's the emulator. And you have the apps and notifications. Again, Android 8, you have notifications for all apps. And it doesn't show me notification channels. No, that's the app. I think I need to reinstall the app so the notification channel is actually shown. I suspect that it's currently suppressed. Because again, the notification, the application channel is configured as part of the app. Forget it. So we get there when we get there. So okay, how do we actually create notifications? So kind of a mini example of how to go about it. So this is a bit contrived. I'm focusing mostly on the main essence when talking about it for now. So we basically have a simple GUI layout. Yeah. Okay. Perhaps we don't. There you go. So my machine is usually a tad challenged if I'm streaming from here. So in conjunction with the Android Studio, that can be a bit challenging. So we have a simple GUI layout that has some title content and some target information, and then 2 buttons, right? I basically made that in advance to make life a bit simpler. And the idea is basically the usual stuff. So now I'm just binding one of the buttons for now that's more relevant here. Having one button that's called button notification. That's the first button in the UI here, barely visible, but nevertheless probably appreciable. On the right side, you see that the identifier should be, hang on. Button notification here, right? So the identifier is there. Okay, so and when that happens, just send a notification. That's basically the everything that happens. So everything magic happens here. You recall that I set up a few elements in the UI, including the title, content, and target. So and the idea is now, what do we do with the what do we do with the notification? Of course, we want to display it in the status bar, but the notification itself will have some sort of action associated with it. So, and that's basically what we want to encode here. So we extract the title and the potential text, and as part of the notification, posting the notification, we create something that's called a pending intent. And a pending intent is basically a prepared intent that is yet to be lodged eventually, right? So it's basically prepared to be activated as soon as the user presses the notification, interacts with the notification. You find various other uses for this one. For example, for proximity listeners, if we talk about geographical using the use of GPS for geolocation, then we have a similar kind of mechanism. But here it's the pending intent, and the pending intent is targeted against an activity, and it has a given request code. So a request code is a unique identifier for the request you're sending. You learned that before already, did you? When you talk about intents? Yes? No? See painful faces? Okay. Probably not. But anyway, every time you send a request, you want to uniquely identify the request so you can deal with the response and match it against the request. So think about it like a unique identifier. It doesn't matter what it is, 0, 5, 10, 200, whatever. But it's mostly about you defining it somehow and keeping track of it. I preferably, that's not the case here, I preferably use constants for that purpose, right? So public static final, and then integer, and then something. So meaning you can reuse the constant, it makes more sense. As opposed to manually matching the numbers, which is a lot harder, especially if you refactor the application or need to change the request code all across. Anyway, so unique identified request code followed by the actual intent. So the intent is specified here, and basically just says action view URI pass and a URL get text string. So any guess what that will do or should do? Well, it technically takes, so URL is a field in my UI basically. So it's a text target field in this case. So it takes the content of that one, textifies it and parses it as a URL, and then associates the action view with it. Okay, since we didn't talk about intents in great depth, we'll need to do that soon anyway, probably perhaps tomorrow, why not? What it does basically, here's the URL, I want to see that thing, do whatever you need to do in the system to get it shown to me as a user. That's simply how it is. So it's not explicit, this intent, about what is used to display a URL, what you do. The only thing you say, I want to view URL, and then the system figures out the rest. That's usually in your system when you get this pop-up dialog when it says which application do you want to use for that purpose. Do you have that sometimes on Android? It asks you, right? So if you have a media player, for example, you have an MP4 file, when you have multiple installed, it will ask you which one you want to use, right? Unless you have a fixed choice. Same here. If there is no browser installed on your system or no default browser specified in the system, it would ask you, otherwise it will use your default browser and basically show the content. That's it, right? So it's quite straightforward, a good default mechanism. of just playing with intents, I guess. So it's a so-called implicit intent because it's not explicit about the application you're supposed to use. It just says, show me this thing however you manage. Okay, so no magic there. So we have the pending intent, which is starting an activity. So you had also the variant of get service, for example, I believe. And the alternatives would be get broadcast and so on, right? So you could start different application component types using that mechanism. And it's a one-shot use, so single open this thing and then whatever, then get rid of this intent, we're done then afterwards. So here's the Android 8 stuff. So one of the things you need to specify or create is a notification channel, which has a unique identifier. So just to get where they are, yeah, here it's a unique identifier. It doesn't really matter. So in Android we find a lot of that, that we need to find unique identifiers just to ensure that we can reference the same elements again. Think about like a primary key or whatever else you want, right? For channels, for requests, for messages, and so on. But you're quite free in specifying the way you like them, right? So we see that recurrent across the entire Android ecosystem more and more. Okay, so you have a notification channel, you provide a unique identifier, you provide some sort of text or name, which doesn't need to be unique, and a default importance. So the importance specifies how the system, again, what kind of features the system uses to notify you. Sound, lights, vibration, blah, 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 right? So something you can configure then in the operating system. Yeah. So in this case, after doing that, I, for whatever reason, set the importance too high. I could have just outright set the importance too high here, so that's a bit of a confusion. But so you can modify the notification channel. You can enable lights. So you can also try to bypass the Android operating system and say, here, that's the default specification for that channel, but that would be overridden by system specifications. So you could say, enable the vibration, for example, set the light color as well, set the vibration pattern, and so on. So there's various little things you can actually configure. Showing a badge, I forgot what that was. I don't know. Yeah. So there's quite a bit of things. So that's kind of the meta. That's the infrastructure stuff. We don't need to worry about it. Well, we need to, but that is something you can easily replicate immediately. More interesting, however, is the actual building of the intent here. Hang on, let's make that. So building of the intent. And how does it work? Well, you use the notification builder. It's the notification compat package, and the reason is, or class in this case rather. The reason why we're using it is so the compatibility packages. I assume. Please.
Can you make the text larger?
Ah, yep, sure. I can. Do you guys know why we're using compatibility packages? Did that do anything? Editor, font 18. Patience. So it's doing something. Anyway, compatibility packages. Why do we use them? Or classes rather. There you go. Yeah. Those compat things, right? We also have that for activities, right? So we have App Compat Activity. Why do we use them, please?
So we can use the app on earlier Android?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So you talked about it already earlier. Okay, cool. I just want to be sure why you constantly see that stuff, right? So it's basically about maintaining compatibility. So those classes rewrite the internals to also match the older variants of Android operating system. Simply suppress functionality that's not supported. So basically, you can use the full feature set, and it will scale up and down depending on the device that actually runs the application. Cool. So we have this builder thing here. Of course, it's related to the context, meaning the application context in this activity here right now. You see, now we need to link it to a channel ID. That's the channel ID created just before. Setting a content title and text. Recall that those are optional, just for the sake of it. Here, in both cases, I'm just taking the fields from the UI, right? Just to display the title and the text, no magic there. And the thing you need to provide mandatorily however, is a small icons. So I put a small icon here, so cheating. Basically, I took a rocket icon or whatever else, doesn't matter. You need to have something, however, right? So that's important. Otherwise, you will not see an error message or whatever. This thing will just not launch, right? You can see it in the logcat though, but you know that's a lot of looking for little value. So strong reminder: remember to set the small icon, right? It can be literally anything, but just set it. And then finally, you need to set the content intent, and that again is the pending intent that was specified above here, right? So this will basically be executed as soon as the user selects the notification and interacts with this. Then after using this DSL to construct sequentially this notification, I mean there's a lot more functionality that you could explore as well. We can just briefly check syntax highlighting and see if we find a bit more things that are interesting. Yeah, you can set colors, for example, if you want to color different notifications. You can set a big view as well, so notifications can expand and, for example, show bigger content if necessary. You can, of course, with the notification, you can also send extras that are bundled with the intent, so you can have meta information that's passed along as well. I don't know, perhaps you have information about the browser you want to actually use, or configuration characteristics for the target application if you're launching an activity. Did you guys talk about extras before? No, cool. Do it tomorrow then. So, but just bear in mind there's something like extras. Think about it like meta information that can be passed along, and so on, right? So setting lights and so on. So it's quite a bit of stuff you can actually set up. So it's by no means conclusive having those few settings there, and they can also time out. That's quite interesting as well. So actually notification can be auto cancelled if they're timeout. So it's quite handy to have as well. So following this one, after this configuration exercise, you basically build the notification. You tell the system how it behaves, so how it should behave, so upon user interaction. So conventionally, I highlighted some typical flags that are relevant here. So the flag auto cancel is the standard one. As soon as the user picks it, selects it, it vanishes, right? Irrespective of what it does. So the intent is, of course, instantiate and run, but the notification will vanish, right? From then on, there's no interaction with the notification anymore. It could be flag insistent, so it really bugs you until you so basically push you to press the notification. I'm not sure if it's clever to use that too much. I mean, you guys probably know the HTML blink tag kind of thing, right? So, and that's considered app use, right? Or it had been, it's removed from standard anyway, but it had been considered as one of the worst introduction into HTML ever. So, and similarly, I think the insistent for notifications probably equally evil, and I think probably will be deprecated eventually. I don't know. So yeah. So no clear is the nasty one. It just stays there. Good luck. Good. So in this slide, there's pretty much not much interaction going on. It's, you can of course use it repeatedly, but it's also could be used more for informational purposes, right? In this particular case. And for notifications related to an ongoing event, for example, phone call, you can link in, a notification to a phone call or other ongoing event, because you see that as well, right? So when you have a phone call, you always have this notification that vanishes afterwards. And alert only once. Yeah, it goes all crazy, but only once at least. So that's slightly better than the insistent variant. So you have various constants that you can use from the notification class. Okay. In specifying how the user interaction with the intent in the UI will be, right? So it doesn't necessarily say anything about the intent that is sent off, but it's about the user interaction. In this particular case, well, it's auto cancel. And then finally, we get closer to system services again, because we need to get reference to the singleton notification service, right? And the way we do that, I briefly alluded to that one in the last session, I believe, is that you get the system service with the unique identifier of notification service, which is, I think, a member of the context. So all the services are, if I recall correctly, in the context. Not writing it out here. Anyway, so it's a constant that you use for all services, right? If you have, for example, location services and so on, you can use that for location services, accessibility service, alarm service, and whatever else. And of course, the notification service as well. So if you get reference to a notification service, always test that you actually get a reference to it. So for whatever reason, permissions, whatever else, now it should never be an issue really. But for whatever reason, if you don't get, then deal with this gracefully. So in the notification manager, that's the time and place where you actually do something. In this case, you're creating a notification channel, just providing a reference to the notification channel instance that you created earlier. And actually, well, you know, notify, call the notification. That's where the notification is actually launched. So call to notify. And again, you have this notification ID thing here, again, some unique identifier. Yeah. So we had multiple unique identifiers now. We had the channel as a unique identifier. We had the intent request associated, the request associated with an intent as a unique identifier, which is basically launched by the notification, but the notification itself also has a unique identifier. So you can potentially interact with the notification again if there's a need for request response. Because again, in Android, everything is kind of loosely coupled. Because as I just mentioned before, there's the notion of a notification listener. So you can actually listener service. So you can actually listen to notifications lodged in the system, right? So in this case, but then the notification ID is quite handy, so you actually know which, you know, the reference to a particular notification if sensible and if useful, right? Perhaps you want to capture your own notifications, and then the ID may be helpful. So that can be literally anything you specify. So don't get confused if you see that thing. Yeah, make use of it sensibly where useful. Cool. So ignore that stuff for now. So that's basically it. We do the notification thing, and hopefully you get something out of that. Well, let's see. It worked eventually, but I had mucked around with this, so I probably perhaps broke it again. Don't know. We'll see now. In fact, I'm somewhat morally happy that my emulator runs without breaking down right now, so that's pretty good. Okay, get rid of this. So, clear all. And just so please. All right, there we are. So we have this beautiful app. I don't think I can increase the font size here, but you get the intuition, right? So I have some title going on here and some content, so to run whatever fields in the thing. For the target, since I was insisting that we use a URL here, it's of course parsing a URL, so I'm sensibly doing a check for a URL before that, before parsing it as well. Here, basically just checking for the prefix HTTP or HTTPS. Otherwise, the whole thing will blow over. So it's kind of a sanity check to some extent. But so, and then just send a notification, right? So that should, wow, cool. So that should show us some notifications. So we see it here right now. Basically, notification when it's sent. The small icon, the name of the application that's associated with this, the timing element, title and content, right? So which is not really meaningful. When you press on it, if everything goes well, it should open or try to open a browser, and yep, it does so. That's a fresh installation here, so yeah, no thanks. And then basically try to access the website that passes along the URL actually and shows it up. In fact, I think I probably was a bit cheating. It probably would show Google anyway, whether or not I had typed that into the app. So so it's not necessarily good. But on that note, now I want to test that. So you can repeat that exercise, and every time you press, it should open the. Ah, yeah, cool. Okay, it actually worked. Good. Sounds good. So basically, that's the whole magic here, right? So the essential bits lie in the construction of the notification, getting a hold of this notification manager, or the system service rather, and sending this thing, right? So far so good. Cool. So right, one of the things that I want to show you. So what happens if we press the notification multiple times? So we have notification. Press again. We press again, and you'll see that nothing happens to the original notification, even if I send new ones in, right? So you see it pop up, but there's no stacking up. I don't have any, collection of notification that you would expect. And this is basically down to the questions. No? Okay. This is down to the fact that to the notification ID, right? So that is what I mentioned before. If you have unique notification ID, what it will do, if it receives another notification with the same ID, it will just update the notification, right? So if you change the text, for example, you can do that. It should just update the notification information, but without launching a new one, though. So let's see, title 2, and we have the same kind of notification with title 2 there, right? However, if you, of course, play with the notification ID, so I made notification ID a variable, right? So every time I send one off, I increase the notification ID. Then you get multiple notifications. So that's quite sensible to think about as well, right? So if you want to really have multiple notifications, then you need to vary the unique identifier. So that's Android's way of interacting with instances in the UI in particular. Okay. T1. First notification I never send it. Don't go away. Set notification. Let's see if they pile up there. Yeah, so now we see different notifications. The content doesn't matter, but you see that the notifications pile up, right? And that's irrespective as to whether content changes or not. But because of the changed notification ID, you get multiple suddenly. And they all have the same behavior, of course, but they are no longer a single one. So that's quite worthwhile to know. So that's where the notification ID comes in case you're wondering. What else did I want to talk about? Right. So the other thing, which is, I don't know, probably could be quite interesting, is if you have notifications of the same type and you want to group them, right? So right now we have this reasonably interesting situation that we have multiple notifications here. Oh, now it's 5, 4, whatever, right? But they take up quite some space. So if you would imagine all your WhatsApp messages like this listed up, you probably can't really interact with this properly. So for this purpose, there's the concept of groups. But since we're currently nearing the break, should we give you a few minutes of a breather first, probably 10 minutes before we continue? Because I see a few people falling asleep, and I don't blame them. So let's say 10 past, we continue. Is that all right? Yeah. Cheers. Thank you.